Is Gen Z in a mental health crisis?
Yes. Yeah. Basically, since the early 2010s, our mental health has just tanked, especially for girls. So we started to see these spikes in anxiety and depression, things like eating disorders, but also rise in self-harm and suicide. So, for example, in the US, between 2012 and 2019, the suicide rate for white middle-aged men increased by 3%. But for girls aged between 12 and 14, it increased by 138%. And the statistics on self-harm are equally as horrific. So something happened around 2012 that is particularly affecting girls, but as a whole is affecting the entirety of Gen Z.
How much of this is laid at the feet of social media, do you think?
Well, I would say a lot, but obviously it's debatable. So some studies show like a negligible impact of social media. Others show that it's terrible. But the thing is with those is some of the studies kind of lump in screen time with social media. So they'll say like, screen time is bad for you, but that could be texting friends, that could be scrolling through Instagram. So they're kind of unreliable. But I think the most compelling bit of evidence is the timeline. So mental health started to decline in the early 2010s. The iPhone came out in 2007. Instagram came out in 2010. Editing apps started to come out around 2013. And also the fact that it's particularly affecting girls. We know that girls spend a lot more time on social media. All the other explanations don't really seem to add up when it comes to why it would be girls. So things like people say the housing ladder or the economy or the climate crisis, and none of them quite fit that explanation apart from social media for me anyway.
Yeah, why is it that women would be particularly concerned about the housing crisis or about the
Yeah.
future temperature or the amount of carbon in the atmosphere? What is it that's causing, beyond just the excessive use of social media, what's the type of use of social media that's causing this disparate effect on girls?
Yeah, well, I think there's different aspects to it. So there's how girls are using social media. So things like obviously social comparison, comparing yourself to everybody and comparing your productivity and your looks and your lifestyle to everyone all the time, which is terrible for mental health. So there's that, but then there's also how social media enables companies to have closer access to girls. So the targeted advertising, and the ability to monitor them, to collect data and to sell that data to platforms who then bombard them with advertisements. So I think a big part of this is the industries that are now able to follow girls around and kind of inundate them. It's an onslaught of advertising, and it's, specific to that young girl's insecurities or vulnerabilities. So, if a girl is anxious about how she looks, she'll get bombarded with beauty companies who are trying to sell her fixes to her specific worries. So it's kind of both at the same time. It's how they're spending their time on social media, but also how companies are utilizing that to exploit them for profit.
Yeah, dig into that. What are the companies that are targeting, monetizing mental distress of girls online? How are they doing this?
So the way I would phrase it is I would like firstly say that, to have some like adolescent angst and turmoil when you're young is normal, especially for like adolescent girls. So we know that adolescent girls are more anxious, more risk averse, more prone to perfectionism than boys of the same age. So I think all of that's pretty normal. And I think every woman would say she's been through, body image issues or whatever. But I think what's happening now is companies are able to exploit those vulnerabilities and target them. So for example, I would say it's completely normal for a girl to worry about how she looks. Everyone will experience that. But it's not normal to have to deal with that in a world of Instagram influencers and TikTok filters and editing apps. At the same time, it's probably normal to worry about your feelings, to feel a bit anxious, but now girls are having to contend with that in a world of therapy culture and ads for ADHD medication and quizzes saying like you might be autistic. And other things as well, like, insecurities in relationships, jealousy, paranoia. I think that's all normal when you're young. But dealing with that in a world of dating apps and hookup culture and online porn, it becomes unmanageable. So I think what's happening is those all kinds of industries. So the beauty industry, what I would call the therapy industry, the pharmaceutical industry, social media companies are all going after these age-old feelings and kind of ramping them up to a degree that I think the average girl can't cope with.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Online therapy companies, in some ways, and I'm a huge proponent of therapy. I'm using it myself in Austin, in-person talk therapy. And I never thought about the dangers of having immediate 24/7 access over the internet to somebody that what is the problem with that? Shouldn't people be able to talk about their feelings with someone who's a qualified professional at all times? Why is there a danger behind that?
Yeah, well, so that's the thing now. It's called unlimited messaging therapy. So it's what most of these platforms are like BetterHelp, Talkspace, that's what they're advertising. And the way they phrase it, so for example, Talkspace will say, talking to a therapist is like texting with a trusted friend or something. And BetterHelp will say, pay an influencer to say, oh, it's like talking to a bestie. And there's a couple of problems with that. The first is that, being able to message a therapist 24/7 from your room means that you're not developing resilience to deal with things. So if you're socially anxious, you're still in your room, you're still on your phone. And, if you're struggling with something, if you feel an uncomfortable emotion, you're able to just get that instant gratification and be soothed, which is the worst thing for anxiety. So that's bad. But then it's also, I feel like these companies push this kind of therapy culture, which is this kind of idea that you can have perfect mental health. So any negative emotion you feel is diagnosable and solvable through their service. And I think that puts pressure on Gen Z. I think, there's pressure from social media companies to have this perfect life. There's pressure from beauty companies to have a perfect face. Then you have pressure from therapy companies to have like this perfect soul that never experiences negative emotions. Like if you look at the advertising is like, if you ever feel worried, if you ever have anxiety, connect with a therapist now, which, it's so bad for resilience, but it's also so obvious why they're doing that. Because if you can convince a generation that, if they pay enough, they can remove those negative emotions, then there's nothing more profitable than that.
Yeah, you've said it's the marketization and medicalization of normal distress, a cultural emphasis on treating every emotion we feel as diagnosable and solvable with consumption is doing so much psychological damage.
Yeah. So I think, two things can be true. There can be a mental health crisis where there's girls that are severely mentally ill, but there can also be this growing population of girls who are just anxious and stressed, and they're being convinced to see their behavior in ways that suit these therapy companies and these drug companies. And I think very often, ironically, it makes them feel mentally ill.
What are hot girl pills?
So hot girl pills are SSRIs or antidepressants. It's a way that Gen Z girls seem to describe their antidepressants on TikTok. There's also silly girl pills. There's also all kinds of like mental health merchandise with pills on them. There's Prozac pillows. There's antidepressant phone cases. I could go on. There's a common phrase now, like hot girls take Lexapro, sexy girls take sertraline, all kinds of stuff like that. So not only is there kind of the normalization of these mental health diagnoses, but the absolute glamorization of